Welcome to part one of our Tale of Two Louises. This is about Louise Lindloff. She didn't have a lot of press, but she did allegedly do some poisoning. Once again, we're in Chicago, that toddling town. Our subject today, Louise Lindloff, spiritualist, medium, and seerist, with a $500 crystal ball that she alleges contains a teardrop from Cleopatra. By June 13, 1912, this particular Louise is under surveillance, but not charged as of yet. Her son Arthur Gronke, 15 years old, had just died, and now Louise is under investigation by June 15th for the deaths of 4 others as well, 2 husbands and 2 other children. Professor Walter S. Haynes, toxicologist with Rush Medical College, had reported to Coroner Hoffman by June 19th that there were large amounts of arsenic found in the boy's liver. Mrs. Lindloff is in the county jail and was informed about the arsenic finding in her son Arthur. "If they have found arsenic, I can't help it," she said. Now, just a side note, because it comes up a little bit later on, arsenic was actually sometimes a component of some medications used starting around 2000 BC. In fact, was used up until the 1940s, until the advent of antibiotics. And not to say it wasn't used even well after that in some countries, but in small doses, as you can imagine. So yes, very suspicious about this finding in her son. Coroner Hoffman went before Judge Honore around June 19th to order the exhumation of the bodies of William Lindloff, Louise's second husband, who died August 3rd, 1910, and Alma, her daughter, who died August 4th, 1911, at the age of 17. And by June 20th, Coroner Hoffman intended to also exhume the bodies of Julius Gronke, Louise's first husband, who died April 12th, 1905, and Frida Gronke, her daughter, who died June 11th, 1908, at the age of 18, while the organs of William and Alma were awaiting toxicology analysis. So what's our body count now? We have 2 husbands, 2 daughters, and 1 son. These 5 deaths occurred in her family only over just the last 3 years, and allegedly she was named as the insurance designee for all of them. So now we're to June 27, 1912. Professor Dr. Haynes, our toxicologist, has identified arsenic in the bodies of William Lindloff, husband, and Alma, daughter. The daybook reported, quote, "She took her precious crystal ball with her to jail and looked into it for the spirits of her dead. She says that she has communicated thus with Arthur and that he tells her that she will be exonerated, but that she is unable to get in touch with her late husband, William Lindloff. However, she is assured that Arthur will look him up." End quote. I can't imagine either really want to speak with you right now. This is like a text message where you text someone and you see red and then crickets. Now, reported July 7th, 1912. It's expected at the inquest in a few days that Mrs. Lindloff will be ordered held to the grand jury. She's been given money from friends, relatives, and strangers to help with her case. The case was withdrawn in the municipal court at the request of Assistant State Attorney. The coroner's jury had recommended she be held to the grand jury, so not necessary to have a lower court trial case. Her attorneys were going to attempt to free her on a writ of habeas corpus the next week. This is Latin for that you have the body, meaning they believe she's been unlawfully imprisoned. I'm assuming that nothing happened with that, so we jump to October 25th. Article title, Spiritualist, Clairvoyant, and Crystal Gazer. Apparently the total money to her was allegedly $8,000 in insurance policies. I read in another newspaper it was over $10,000. Her attorneys were able to get a jury of married men who were not prejudiced against those who practiced spiritualism. October 26th. Her defense receives a blow when prosecution was allowed to mention the other suspicious deaths in their opening statements. Testimony was given by 2 doctors that Arthur, her 15-year-old son, had died with symptoms resembling poisoning. Dr. Joseph L. Miller, witness for the prosecution, testified that Louise had been advised to have her son taken to the hospital for treatment to avoid suspicion against her for doing nothing to help him. Quote, "Would Arthur have had a chance of recovery if he had been taken to a hospital?" End quote. Dr. Miller was asked in court. His response, quote, "I think he might have gotten well if no more poison had been administered." End quote. Dr. A.F. Warner said in his testimony for the prosecution that Louise had predicted the dates of deaths for Arthur and for his sister, her daughter Alma. Dr. Warner had been with William, Arthur, and Alma during the course of their illness. Quote, "Their symptoms were about the same. Dr. Miller and I agreed that Arthur was being poisoned. On the Sunday before his death, his mother predicted that Arthur would die the following Wednesday, which he did. She said all the time that he had a $2,000 policy on his life." End quote. This doctor did admit that the medicine for Alma and Arthur did contain a poisonous ingredient. Remember, having arsenic in medication was not unheard of. I'm sure that was what the defense was going for, but... Now we're jumping ahead to October 29th. Prosecution at her trial introduced evidence from expert toxicologist Professor Dr. Walter S. Haynes that he had found between 3 to 4 grains of a mineral poison in the bodies of Louise's son Arthur, in one of her husbands, and in Alma, her daughter. He stated, quote, "In my opinion, all 3 members of the family died from poison," end quote. He also analyzed a box that was found in her house, the contents of which contained 80% mineral poison. October 30th. Mrs. Martha Grainer of Milwaukee testified in court that Mrs. Lindloff told her, quote, "Julius will only live a few days. And when he is dead, I'll get $2,600. I'm going to open a saloon and buy a horse and buggy and have a good time," end quote. This was her first husband, who at the time of this statement was critically ill, and Mrs. Lindloff seemed to know he'd be perishing soon. November 2nd. Defense called a surprise witness, Miss Sadie Ray, who was actually supposed to have been a star witness for the prosecution. As her testimony did little for them, and I couldn't find what her testimony was, defense decided to give her a go for their side. She was a former housekeeper for Louise and said that Arthur had a chronic skin disease, hence why he was taking medicine for it, the medicine which contained the mineral poison / arsenic. Henry Kuby backed this testimony up. He was a table boarder in Louise's home. November 3rd. Prosecution did not intend to seek the death penalty. She had declared that she had a message from the other world, letting her know she'd be acquitted. She said it was her son's spirit because he knows of her innocence. End quote. November 5th. Convicted of murder in the first degree, 25 years. The verdict didn't seem to be a surprise after jury deliberations took about 3.5 hours. The verdict was read and Louise appeared to have no visible emotion. As the jury was polled, she seemed to have a calm acceptance of their verdict. Apparently the jurors' own demeanor as they filed into the courtroom gave her indication of what was to come. Judge Cooper waited for the verdict. She searched the jury's faces as they filed in and seemed disappointed / frightened. Notice this is a different newspaper account, as the first one said, no visible emotion. Miss Sadie Ray and Mrs. Mary Wyntaylor, her friends, were sitting behind her. Her attorney, George Remus, immediately requested a new trial. It took 3 ballots for the jurors to get to the final rendered punishment, but only the 1 ballot for the guilty verdict. 5 wanted life imprisonment. 7 wanted a heavier penalty. Second ballot, 5 life, 7 for 40 years. Third ballot, 25 years. Not going to lie, this is odd to me. If some wanted life and others wanted 40 years, you'd think you'd be somewhere between life and 40 years, but they came up with 25? Anyway, Louise is now about 45 years old, so it was already speculated that the 25 years would mean she would be in prison her entire life anyway, as their shorter lifespan back then. November 24th, 1912. Independent examiners post-trial declared that they had found barium in Arthur's body. I'm assuming this is in addition to the arsenic already found. Louise died March 16, 1914, in the county jail hospital from cancer. At the time of her arrest, she was more than 200 pounds. At the time of her death, less than 100. The Supreme Court of Illinois will then be asked to dismiss her appealed case, since obviously that won't be needed. So ends the story of this Louise Lindloff. Assuming she was indeed guilty, it's beyond sad that she destroyed the lives of her family for what appeared to be just some money. If you enjoyed this presentation, please click like and subscribe.